Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Shamplina. I'm the founder of Landlord Action, and I'm with Nigel Lewis, editor
of LandlordZONE.
of LandlordZONE. So today's webinar, we've had 2,000 landlords and letting agents registered. Section 21, it's going, and gone. The reality is in 2 to 3 years' time, Section 21 will be abolished, and it is a major law that's coming in under the Renters Reform Bill. So I'll give you a little bit of background to myself. We're going to debate what's happening in the industry, a little bit of background. Landlord Action is a company that I founded in 2000 with my old business partner to help landlords with problem tenants, offering fixed fees and a free advice line regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority. Landlord Action has never been as busy as it is today, 22 years later. Obviously with regard to rent arrears and landlords exiting the market, and up until I think it was at the end of August, we dealt with over 2,200 instructions for landlords. So that's just a little bit about Landlord Action. And as Chief Commercial Officer, I represent Hamilton Fraser. Hamilton Fraser owns lots of well-known brands within the private rental sector, such as Total Landlord Insurance, which deals with the insurance for the National Residential Landlords Association, LandlordZONE, which obviously is a news-breaking portal where Nigel is the editor. We have Tenant Verify, referencing company, we own My Deposits, the deposit scheme, one of 3 mandatory deposit schemes with protecting over £1 billion worth of deposit. OHM, which is a deposit replacement alternative. Client Money Protect, which is effectively an insurance to protect the consumer, the landlord, and the tenant against misappropriation of funds from letting agents, and the property redress scheme, which is one of 2 redress schemes in the lettings industry, where all letting agents have to be part of a redress scheme. Landlord Action, which is obviously a regulated housing law specialist. We act actually for over 500,000 landlords and 22,000 letting agents.
Wow.
So that's just an overview. Background about myself: I've been helping landlords for over 30 years now. My background was legal. I worked in a couple of law firms. I've worked in recessions. I am a landlord now after starting Landlord Action in the year 2000.
You stumbled into television.
I stumbled into television just by chance. In 2001, I did my first TV show, which was for Carlton TV, and a lot of people might recognise me from the TV show Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords, where I filmed 6 series. And I do a lot of advisory work with the government, do loads of campaigning for the landlords. Have a title which I'm very proud of, and I've been called many things, believe you me, Nigel, as you well know, as the landlord's friend, and do lots of campaigning, do lots of letting agent training, and lots of public speaking. So that's basically my background. Nigel, tell us about you.
Well, I've been a journalist for, now, yes, nearly 26, 7 years. I've been writing about property since 2000. And I have worked for the Daily Mail. I am currently working for LandlordZONE and loving it. And also I have a TV background, so I used to work with Phil Spencer on Location.
And you've got definitely the face for TV. I have the face for radio, as everyone keeps telling me.
Absolutely.
So what I wanted to do, Nigel, is we're going to debate about what's happening in the market, about obviously the Renters Reform Bill that's coming through in the 12 points. We'll talk about that. What we want is our subscribers to this webinar, please fire over your questions, anything you want to ask us questions about, any concerns you have. We're trying to answer them. We're going to answer them in a layman's and a landlord's language, which is really, really important.
Yes.
So the current private rental sector, I thought what was important was actually to tell how big's the market at the moment. So there's 4.4 million households. 19% of the housing industry is the private rental industry, right? Private rental sector, larger than the social housing sector, which is 17%. Where there's been a big change in the last 10 years is the age of the renters. Between 16 and 34 years old, 43% of the renters out there are renting. So they've become younger in renters now. And then, of course, we've seen a big increase again in the last 10 years of older retired people renting out there. 30% of renters have children, and the private rental the private renters on average spend 31% of their income.
Actually,
on
one
renters.
bit of data we don't have on that list is that there are 2.54 million landlords.
Exactly.
If you divide that into 4.4, you can see why there are so many. There's still so many small one property, two property.
Well, that's it. And I think on those stats, I know that something like 85% of landlords have 1 to 3 properties.
Yeah.
And we are going to talk about the here and now and what's happening. There's a lot of panic in the industry.
Yeah.
I say to landlords, we don't need to sell, don't sell. It's actually the best time it's ever been. People look at me thinking I'm mad about being an alien, but if you think about rents, they're going through the roof. Tenants are accepting that the rent rises, and of course the tenant demand on viewing of properties is totally unprecedented, isn't it?
Well, hopefully the future Secretary of State for Housing is watching this webinar and will be aware that we are facing some challenges in this market.
Yeah, I mean, of course, landlords are needed more than ever, and I think with a lot of government policies that have come through, they're not looking at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that you are going to have a bigger shortage, which is happening.
That's the way it's going.
And we're seeing it. I've seen a massive change just in the last 6 months alone, especially with the political changes and the mortgage rates going up, and mortgage deals now being 5.5%, going up from 2.5%. A massive shift. And landlords in the last 10 years haven't really faced that, have they? They've had cheap money, haven't they?
We all have, haven't we? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And things have to go up, and unfortunately, that's what's happening at the moment. But if you look at what the government are saying is, and that's why the Renters Reform Bill has come in, is tenants are paying more rent than ever before. Landlords have to up their game. They have to be professional. Even if you're 1 or 2 landlord, you have to give a better service. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail with regard to the Renters Reform Bill. But if you look compared to owner occupier, which is 18% and 27% social tenants, tenants are paying more money of their wages in the private rental sector. 73% of private renters are employed. 1.1 million tenants are on housing benefit, 26%. I think hearing on the radio before, and I think it is really relevant, and obviously we now have Rishi Sunak as our Prime Minister. I think what is relevant, if you think about what happened during COVID, he kept the lights on, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's interesting that we're going to have a new Prime Minister in a couple of days' time who has some quite deep knowledge of the housing market. It would be nice if he gave landlords, let them off that the extra stamp duty they have to pay, because that wasn't included in the recent announcement from his predecessor, I think we can call him. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I also would say that a lot of our stories the last 12 months have been about the payment of universal credit and housing benefit. And a lot of landlords get in contact with us asking to do stories about how they're having problems getting the money.
Well, look, I mean, look, from someone that's been in this industry a long time, and we see here 1.1 million tenants on housing benefit. Actually, was it in the height of COVID? There was something like 6 million people on universal credit.
Yeah.
I think one of the worst laws that ever came into effect was actually in 2008, which was the direct payment to tenants of housing benefit.
Yeah.
And that was under the previous government, the Labour government, where they wanted to empower tenants. Now, unfortunately, you have a lot of housing benefit tenants that unfortunately can't manage their money. And if they get some monies that come in, especially with the cost of living crisis, which could be an issue, so direct payment to landlords. And of course, that sector is really going to struggle to find housing because, of course, they're going to get outbid by private tenants.
Well, there's no affordable housing, well, not enough affordable housing being built. The waiting list for council houses, as we used to call them, is getting longer. And
it's about 20 years, I believe.
Yeah. So, but also, so it's also, to be precise, it's about the fact that when a landlord asks the government or asks DWP to have a direct housing payment put to them instead of the tenant, that's where the trip up comes, because it's very slow and it's very lumpy when it comes to getting.
And it's not, and also on that point, as landlords, this is a business, and landlords do, especially in COVID, they did some amazing things, when tenants were struggling and so forth. But the biggest worry for a landlord is not getting your rent, and if there's barriers in a way of not direct payment, it's got to be a stumbling block. And the people that miss out are the more vulnerable tenants, of course. On average, renters live in a property for 4 years and 2 months. Okay, there is this perception that it's a 6-month and 12-month tenancy, and that's it. Actually, where we are now, marketplace, a lot of tenants can't afford to move. Actually, historically, landlords haven't been putting rents up, but I've seen that rents are going up in the last few months, purely because obviously rates that are changing, and tenants are accepting that rents are going up. But of course, the cost of living crisis, Nigel, is really going to kick in next year, isn't it? With the winter months.
And if you talk to landlords, and I'm sure it's true that many people listening today, is that no landlord wants to kick a tenant out as long as they're paying the rent.
It's the last resort, yeah.
And most landlords, if not, a significant majority of them, don't really want to put the rent up unless they have to, because they know it then imperils their tenants' financial viability. So the narrative out there, which is often put out, that some
the greedy landlord,
we're all trying to kick them out, and as soon as they bloody well is maybe true in individual cases, but as a general trend is not. And I think that figure, 4.2 years, that shows that most landlords are keen to get their tenants on a level footing and keep them as long as possible.
Well, exactly. And look, again, we're going to come into, and if you look at here, the whole point of the Renters Reform Bill relates, the underpinning relates to the non-decent home standard. So there's 21% of properties in the private rental sector that don't reach the standard on non-decent homes requirement, and they're trying to halve that by 2030. And believe it or not, I didn't know this actually, and I was on an ITV program with Dan Hewitt where he was exposing the social housing sector. I saw one episode, I think it was Croydon Council, where there was a mushroom. I remember I texting you when I was watching the TV at the time, a mushroom on the wall at the time. But supposedly the private rental sector housing is worse than the social housing sector.
The percentage of non-decent is higher. So they're saying that the decent home standard has reduced by, I think they're fair to say, 50%. The percentage overall of non-decent down to better ones. So what they're hoping is the private rental sector will have the same experience. But we shall see if that happens.
But really, I mean, and again, watching that Dan Hewitt program, we talk about social housing standards. I mean, I presumably per se, council houses are worse than housing association houses, would you say?
Gosh, yes. And unfortunately, Croydon is not a good example of a competent council, as we all are aware. Probably, if you read the sort of news that we do. But the interesting thing, I think, and one point which is never made, is that it depends where you look. So if you look at the whole of Croydon, for example, yes, there is a lot of non-decent private rented property within it, but it depends where in Croydon you look. So I think you just be careful about when you talk about these averages are quite often used by many people to beat landlords, but aren't necessarily that informative.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I think this was quite an interesting stat. And all these stats came from the English Housing Survey, is 43% of renters have no savings whatsoever, and that will increase, I suppose. We're obviously at the hike of energy bills and food prices and everything that's happening. And only 10% of households have adequate savings to be able to get a 95% mortgage. Well, where are you going to get 95% mortgage nowadays, especially what's happening in the marketplace? So I thought these stats were quite relevant, and that's why I wanted to show them. So I thought what I wanted to do as well, so that landlords that aren't too aware, I read, and I know you read, the 84-page report.
We did, yes.
I literally locked myself in a room and I had to read it and digest it.
It is very interesting, actually. It's not dull reading. It's just too long.
It is too long, but I think that and I get it. And actually, I would say to landlords, there's nothing really to fear in these 12 points. There's a couple of points that do stand out, and we'll touch on that. Thus, we've called this webinar Section 21 Going, Gone, and we're going to highlight and speak about that in more detail. Please, anyone subscribing and listening to this webinar, please put forward your questions, anything that Nigel or myself say, put them through, and we're going to hopefully have about, I would say, maybe about 20 minutes at the end of this webinar, so we can answer as many questions as possible.
And the ones which can't be answered, you're going to get your friends to answer it.
Yeah, so we've got a company called HF Assist, which is a letting agent and corporate landlord advice line. They will respond to every single question. They don't know that yet, but I'm going to stick it on them to do it. So let's talk about the 12-point plan. So half the number of non-decent rented homes by 2030 I need to be half. So they're talking about the 21%, how they're going to do it, how they enforce it. That's an issue. And I would say to you, Nigel, where you've been writing for us for quite a while now, running LandlordZONE, the housing improvement programme, and receiving investment of £20 million for increased enforcement. This has been a big problem, isn't it? Enforcement. It's great having all these laws,
Yeah.
but what's
and
your experience?
Also that 20 million quid looks great, but if you divide it by the number of councils in England, which is what this is covering, then it suddenly goes down to not much per council. So which is nice, but enforcement is the biggest problem, and it's a white elephant in the room almost all of the time. You can talk as much as you like about making properties better, getting rogue landlords out, getting rogue letting agents out, and all this sort of stuff. In reality, there's very few people around, and I know you've got friends in several councils who do the job of enforcement, but the number of councils in the UK who do what you call exemplary enforcement is fairly low.
I mean, they work quite siloed, and the problem is everything's about budget. You look at Newham Council, there's 32 boroughs in London. Newham Council, they make £1 million a year out of fines and whatever. They run it like a business, which is fair enough. And all the good landlords that have tuned in today, if we talk, and we can't do a talk about HMO licensing and all that, because we need another 5 hours for that, because that can be a bane of a landlord's life. I get that, and people cynically say, oh, it's money for the council, and I get all that. But I can say in feedback, I've actually I've shadowed Harrow Council. It was they feature on the TV show with me, and there was only 4 enforcement officers for Harrow Council, and they have different wards, and how they do the licensing across Harrow Council, London Borough Harrow, they vary because every ward is different. So it depends about antisocial behaviour, crime, and all the different type of ward as to who gets licensed. But they've got a thankless task. A lot of the time is maybe landlords are a bit naive, but of course I say to, and of course I'm on a show called Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords. Those landlords are criminal landlords, and let's be very clear, there's far more problem tenants than there are problem landlords. Is that fair enough to say?
I think that's reasonable.
So then we go on to abolishment of Section 21. So we've written many articles about that, and obviously I wear my hat with regard to obviously running landlord action, and got 22 staff doing all these cases. One stat I will tell you about Section 21 is that 26% of landlords that have served a Section 21 notice in the last 12 months have done so because they're looking to sell. So a quarter. I mean, so look, let's talk about Section 21. Section 21 is called non-fault. It's a 2-month notice. We're going to go into another slide further down the line. The government want to abolish this because they call it non-fault. But there is generally a fault, isn't there?
Of course, because as we said earlier, a landlord never evicts someone just because they fancy doing it. They do it usually for good reason, sometimes for the wrong reason, and that's quite often comes out in the press. But most of the time, it's for a good reason, which is non-payment of rent, bad behaviour, and so on.
Well, that's right. And so it's non-payment of rent, it's antisocial behaviour, it's a landlord selling, landlord moving back into the property. I gave evidence at Parliament in 2014 to cross-party about retaliation eviction, and we did a survey on landlords and whether landlords would admit it or not. But I think it was 1% of landlords have been serving Section 21 notice because tenants have complained about disrepair. Normally, it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things. I think actually one of the biggest challenges going forward, and we don't touch it in this webinar, is going to be EPC upgrades. Okay, what will happen is if Section 21 goes in a couple of years, then they're also going to be looking at introducing periodic secure tenancies. Now, I think that there's student blocks that are going to be exempt.
There will be, yes.
There's going to be a lot of student landlords there that should also aren't having purpose blocks. They should have exemption as well, because I'm seeing now, and I saw an article in the Guardian not long ago about students struggling to find properties.
Well, there's a little point there I might be worth saying, which is that we've got some landlords up in the Midlands who've been talking to last month, and they were saying that, and pointing out that nationally the government are taking a very different view of HMO private landlords who just rent out, Victorian semis, and the institutional landlords. And both on EPC, on all of this stuff, they are taking 2 different approaches.
And that's the wrong thing as far as I'm concerned.
I hope the government,
because what happens is that you lose that stock, and what happens is you have there's also knock-on effects. So you have a renewing of a tenancy. There's agencies that have that have departments, and you want stability, but actually the real route to is there's 4.4 years and 2 months as the average term of tenants anyway. So we have to see how that plays out, because of course it's about whole procedure about gaining possession. But if you do abolish Section 21, you have to make sure the new grounds for Section 8 are stronger, have more mandatory grounds. At the moment, there's only 2 grounds under Section 8. There's 17 grounds altogether. I believe there's going to be 22 grounds, and some of the working groups that I'm on, I put forward a suggestion to the government about access, but because access is a real big problem.
So can you just explain, because it took me a while to get around my head around this. What is the difference between a mandatory and a non-mandatory reason?
Right.
A ground.
So mandatory means the judge has to grant a possession order.
So if you just say, I want to sell the house, so
there's going to be 2 extra grounds put in as mandatory, which will be selling the property. But you have to prove you're selling property, because obviously there'll be landlords saying they're going to try and sell, but they're not selling.
Give a contract with an estate agent.
Well, yeah, big contract. There'll be a procedure that you have to follow. Also, a family member moving back in. Now, I talk to you in the practical language because obviously I do this all the time. I think my prediction is that when Section 21 is banned, it normally comes in April or in October, as you know, with regard to law changes. I actually believe that you'll get panic, you'll get landlords serving them out. So bearing in mind, the rules at the moment with Section 21, it's a 2-month notice, has a 6-month lifespan, can only serve it after 4 months. And there's a whole load of there's a whole load of procedures that you have to follow. Bearing in mind, you can't gain possession unless the deposits and deposit scheme, the deregulation, HMO license, EPC, how to rent. There's a whole lot of stuff. So obviously, it's been diluted.
And does it take more than 2 months in reality?
So it's 2 months, and then you've got to realise actually,
with all the court to and fro.
So all in all, you could be in for 6 months, and I'll come on to that further down the line. But 92% of the time, believe it or not, tenants end the tenancy themselves. You know, it's very little a landlord might serve a notice, but we are seeing a big increase now, because you will see a lot more landlords selling because of the market want to cash in their chips. A whole load of different reasons.
And if I can just say, so if I could be devil's advocate for a minute, if Shelter were here right now, or Generation or whatever, they would say Section 21 no fault is bad because a landlord can eject a tenant without a good reason, and sometimes there are retaliatory evictions, those sort of stuff.
Yeah, but it's very low.
We would say, well, yes, that is true, but it's a very small minority, isn't it?
So let me yes, agreed. So let me tell you an unintended consequence.
Go.
Right. So an unintended consequence is you've got there's another reason why you serve Section 21, Nigel, is tenants are told by the council to stay put. It's a massive problem. We do loads of this.
Intentionally making yourself homeless.
Yeah. So if a tenant leaves, the council won't rehouse them because you made yourself homeless. So they encourage, a lot of the time, the councils are still saying this after many years. Wait for a Section 21 notice to be served. You get a court order, get the bailiffs. You can watch my TV program where, you know, and it is a lot of them extreme cases, but sometimes obviously you're evicting families, and it can be really sad, especially being a father myself. But when they go to the council, they say, look, I'm being evicted. Here's a possession order under the accelerated procedure, Section 21 possession order. There's no rent arrears under that procedure. When you get rid of that, the unintended consequence is that more landlords have a lot of landlords, we say 30-40% of landlords are using Section 21 because there's rent arrears. Now, all of a sudden, you push that, and they're not even bothering collecting the rent arrears. So they're not even chasing it. They want their property back. They're writing it off. Loads of landlords do that. Since COVID has happened, the rent arrears have gone up and up and up. We had a rent arrears case of £140,000, right? But we've had a record amount of cases of over £20,000. So what's happening is landlords are going to have to be forced under the Section 8 procedure, which means you have to go to court, have a hearing date, get a money order. All of a sudden, that money order and the bailiff eviction will show a money order. So they go to the council with a money order, where previously it would have had no money order. The council said, hold on a second, you owe £5,500 rent arrears. You've intentionally made yourself homeless. We can't rehouse you. We have a terrible social housing. We have a terrible temporary accommodation housing issue, and as per recent stats from Inside Housing, in 1 year the temporary housing accommodation cost was £1.6 billion.
So basically saying the system is set up to fail to a certain extent.
Well, the thing is, there's unintended consequences. And what about the scenario? What about the scenario as well, whereby you've got great tenants, and 95% of the time tenants are great, right? You know, you might have an end of deposit dispute or whatever, and then all of a sudden, because of what's happened and all the scenarios and all the law changes and all and of course landlords have to be more professional, and quite rightly a tenant should have secure tenancy and a great property. But what happens is that landlords have said they've had enough, and we're seeing a lot more of that. they're serving a Section 21 notice before it's being banned. The tenants in the property were great tenants. They were there 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They have to leave. They have to find somewhere else, and that rent is much higher now. That's an unintended consequence. You know, and we could talk about that all the time.
So we just, I'm sure that a lot of people watching this might be screaming this at the screen. But what? So in, let's say, in 2.5 years' time, when it is gone, and Section 21 is gone, and we've got the new regime up,
Section 8, yeah.
Section 8. What? And I've got a tenant who doesn't stop paying the rent.
Yeah.
What do I do?
So Section 8 will be if there's 2 months rent arrears, you apply to the court, you get a possession order, you get a money order, and you get your property back. All in all, takes you 4, 5, 6 months. Okay. Worst case scenario, but you're in for 4, 5.
So it's going to take longer, possibly.
Well, we don't know yet. So, but what I'm saying is, when you ban Section 21, you have to strengthen the grounds of Section 8 so that landlords can get possession and have confidence. You have to bring in mediation. We're going to talk about that very shortly. Very, very early on, because if you can avoid court at all costs, makes sense. You need to reform the court system, have investment, make a lot of it digitalized. You need more judges, you need more bailiffs, and all that stuff. All that stuff needs to happen. And I'm on a working group called the Lettings Industry Council, done some great jobs, and we do reports upon reports. And there was going to be housing courts. That's been kicked into long grass. But I would recommend that basically people look at that report, the Lettings Industry Council.
We better move on.
We're going to move on. So an increase of rent. The government are saying a landlord can only increase the rent once a year. Well, that's reasonable enough. If the rent is too excessive, then the tenant can go to the housing tribunal, you know, a first tier tribunal.
So it'd be good to ask people watching if they've increased the rent. Did they do it in between tenancies, or do they do it at change of?
Yeah, well, I can see another survey coming on. Definitely LandlordZONE, and I think we do this with LandlordZONE. And I would say with regard to LandlordZONE, you do 3 to 5 breaking news articles a day. And obviously we come up with some stats for what's happening in the industry. And then also there's going to be a single ombudsman, which is really, really important. And I think it's a good thing. So there's 2.3 million landlords, whatever there was. Every landlord will have to be part of a redress scheme, just like letting agents
Which is going to be a big change. I don't think a lot of landlords, especially the smaller ones, probably don't realise that's going to be done.
Well, I don't realise. I mean, if you think what happens when the deposit scheme came in 2007, you've still got landlords that don't put deposit schemes, and that came out 15 years ago. So that's going to be an issue. So the redress means that the tenant can have redress against the landlord.
The landlord can no longer be sort of invisible.
The landlord can't be invisible. So what will happen is that you have to make a complaint. There has to be a complaints procedure. You know, this is a business. I think the advice I give to landlords is the hobby landlording industry is finished. Okay, you are professional landlords. You put a price on your time, and if you are struggling, then you get a really good accredited managing agent that you do your due diligence on to do the full management for you. It makes total sense. So redress is coming in. There's also going to be dispute resolution, mediation brought in very, very early. So if I'm going to serve a notice on you, what mediation? How can I work that out?
Which the government's really keen on, isn't it?
Well, it is keen. It can work if it's done properly.
It's running a trial at the moment.
It had a trial, but it was not a success because they tried to do the mediation when it went way down to court hearing stage.
It would be rude to say it cost £2 million and about 100 people used it.
Yeah, it was a complete waste of time. They should have come to our offices at the PRS and Landlord Action. We could have saved them some money, believe you me. What is a really good idea is a new property portal, which I really like.
It's a good idea.
Which have a property portal, it has a URN number, a landlord or a letting agent or a tenant, or even if you're going to buy a property at auction, you look to see what documentation, how compliant that property is. I know we have HMO licensing, and again, the Lettings Industry Council did some great work on this. We said, well, this could take over HMO licensing. There's an argument to say that may not happen because of obviously income and all that type of stuff.
So how the next 6 months goes.
Exactly. So you put a number in. Yes, it's got EPC, gas safety, it's MEES, it's got what has it got on it? Has it got a deposit? What's been linked to the property? Is it compliant? That can only be good, raising standards. How it works, the mechanics, I do not know, because that's a big job, isn't it?
I know, but will it include the landlord's, like contact details? I don't know.
Maybe, I should think so, because you don't forget you have a lot of absent overseas landlords. Strengthening the local councils for enforcement powers to crack down on criminal landlords. Yes, we agree with that. We see that all in the press. That's fantastic. We wait and see. Obviously, the devil's in the detail, and it's all about the money, isn't it?
Although the days of being able to hide your income from HMRC are probably going to be limited in number.
Well,
of
I think
days.
also the digital online, when you've got to file your accounts every quarter now, has obviously changed
Another
that.
reason.
Yeah. So yes, and of course, you know, there's going to be a lot more data the government are going to get. I'm not being cynical. It's nothing to do with tax, is it?
I couldn't possibly
No,
comment.
of course not. Okay. So then we talk about blanket bans where you can't say we do not want children. We do not want DSS tenants. Those days are well and truly over. It makes sense. That is discriminatory, isn't it?
It is, and I think so. That the big change here is for the property portals like Zoopla and Rightmove, who won't be able to put that in the adverts any longer.
And I think also on that point, and I really worry, and again, the abolishment of Section 21, you're going to have landlords that are going to be much more methodical when it comes to referencing. You're going to be asking for guarantors. That's going to be an issue. I think landlords will just make decisions, but you can't openly advertise that.
And there are people who say that this part of the renters reform bill, soon to be an act, is that it will put off landlords taking on risky tenants. Well, that's not good for the lower end of the market.
I know, and that's why. And again, it comes back to we have a housing crisis, social housing
which won't make the housing crisis better.
And you know, you need to encourage landlords, and some landlords do amazing jobs and whatever. So you need to work with them. It's really, really important to work with landlords, and that's important. And I do lots of talks for councils now that are doing loads more landlord forms to try and engage. Tenants have the right to request a pet in a property.
Divisive topic, this.
Okay, let's quickly debate it. The landlord cannot unreasonably refuse. So I've got a dog. I have got a dog. Okay, love my dog. Great for my mental well-being. Okay, but if I come into a big block of flats, there could be a head list and no pets. That's reasonable. Maybe you decline that, but
because by law you'd have by the regulation of leaseholds you would have to decline that, and that'd be fine. But if I've just got a semi in whatever Basingstoke, and it's not, there's no lease involved.
Okay.
You say I want a pet. I go no. You go, well, no, my pet's. You go, I know it's not suitable for pets. So you go, it's been defleed. It's got like a
exactly. Believe it or not, there's organisations out there that have pet passports, like pet referencing, which is quite mad.
Or you say I've got pet insurance.
Or as a landlord, he can say to the tenant, that's fine. I want you to take out pet insurance, which will be relating to damage of the property. Now, with my deposits cap on, I can tell you now, disputes wise, 17% of disputes relate to cleaning and fair wear and tear. Hardly any relate to pets, believe it or not. And actually, statistically, a landlord and that rents to a tenant with a pet, they stay in the property longer, and they can actually get more rent actually. So, but in case it's important to make sure as a landlord get regular inspections and all that.
So again, to play devil's advocate, on the one hand, landlords will probably say, "Don't tell me who I can and can't have in my house, and with or without pets. That's my decision. You know, get off my back." Which I think is a reasonable sort of reaction. On the other hand, tenants with pets tend to stay longer and probably more loyal, but ironically, because they can't find any other property.
Well, it is, and I think that's an issue. So I am actually for it, but I think that it's got to be reasonable, really. I mean, look, I've been into some horrendous properties, as you can well imagine, with the TV show. I mean, the worst thing is actually going in with the smell. It's the worst thing. I went into one, and this guy had 12 cats, and I'm allergic to cats, and I could not breathe.
So that would be a reasonable. That would be a good reason to say to a tenant you can't have 12 cats.
But the problem is that you'll get tenants that won't have a pet in, and then they bring a pet in, and then which is a big problem.
Okay.
And then finally, working with industry experts to monitor passport deposits, where the deposit is a passport and it moves with the tenant.
So where are we with that?
Well, I think that's been kicked into long grass with it. So we
said nice to have maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we have obviously our deposit replacement alternative business called Home, where the tenant pays £5 or £10 a month, and that insures them for 5 weeks rather than paying the deposit up front. But I think it's so that tenants are able to move, so they're not locked in and they're stuck when there's a deposit dispute. So the devil's in the detail.
So I think it's fair to say the government said lifetime deposits, nice. Bit complicated, we'll leave it.
Thanks. But I think they will come back to it, and obviously as my deposits we are involved doing some advisory work with the government. So let me just run through section 8 and section 20 on what they actually are. So section 8 is breach of tenancy. There's 17 grounds. There's 2 mandatory grounds, one of which is for rent arrears. Obviously under the Renters Reform Bill we think there's going to be lots more new grounds to make it easier for landlords to serve notice, to make sure that they can prove that they can get their property back. Some of the grounds are very old, okay, After the abolishment of Section 21, Section 8 needs more mandatory grounds, and landlords and agents, unfortunately, are still serving incorrect notices. We see this day in, day out at landlord action. Incorrect notice. I mean, when I was working, and we come to Section 21, which is the Form 6A, I was a part of the group that actually helped with the drafting of that notice, which was an easy 2-month notice. It's much easier now. But let me just give you a bit of history about Section 21. So the 1988 Housing Act came in, changed everything. It opened up the whole sector of, obviously, the private rental sector. It encouraged investment. Okay, yes, you saw a lot of council house sell-offs, which ended up into buy-to-let, and there's some argument about the shortage of properties. But we opened up a whole industry, and that was post.
Which is why your career and your business started up, wasn't it? Because this created the need for eviction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I started my company in 99, 2000. I mean, actually, what happened was, prior to 1997, when you gave a tenancy agreement to a tenant, you also had to serve a Section 20 notice to confirm it was an assured short-hold tenancy. After 1997, they brought in just a section. They brought in just normal tenancy agreements. That's when the accelerated possession procedure started, which was in 1999, where you can just go to court, apply to court to get a possession order without having a hearing date. So there is unintended consequences. I actually thought the biggest change to the sector was going to be the abolishment sector, and I was really worried about it, and I've been very vocal and this, that, whatever. But actually, I think the biggest challenge most probably will be the EPC upgrade now, because of the cost involved.
Because evictions only probably affect 5% of landlords a year, 10% maybe.
Yeah, most probably less than that. Yeah, most probably less than 5%.
EPC will affect 80% of landlords,
and it's a lot, and that's change. And again, we just need, hopefully, we hope, as landlords and the landlords community, that the government embraced it. And I think that the biggest issue is, which was a massive change to the industry, was obviously Section 24, wasn't it? You've written loads of articles about it.
I know. So it's a nice thing when the government gives you a tax relief. It's a harder thing when they take it away. And so
which means that rents went up. Is that right?
I know. So you could argue, right? So it'd be a really good idea if the government said, well, reinstate the tax relief you get on your mortgage interest. Because that doesn't cost tenants anything, apart from
Yeah, but the government have earned loads of tax, loads of money out of it.
But if they said you get that back, but then you're going to have to pay for the EPC upgrade, and that might be a solution.
Well, I think
at the moment it's looking very unlikely that most landlords will be able to afford this.
Exactly, and I think it's just, we can all see, we're in the industry, we can all see stuff happening.
Yeah.
But there's lots of landlords coming into the market. There's lots of bigger corporate landlords that are scaling up and are able to scale up. And the argument is, they could say, well, that's what we want as the government. So why are landlords using Section 21 notice? Tenants are in arrears, landlords are selling the properties, landlords are moving back into the properties, refurbishment of the property, antisocial behaviour. And let me just talk about antisocial behaviour. And we saw a big increase in mental health and antisocial issues during COVID and during lockdown, 2 years of lockdown. So at the moment, if you want to evict your tenant and the tenant's paying all the rent, and you've got an HMO and you've got someone with mental health issues, or someone that's harassing other tenants, they've been violent or drink, drugs, whatever, issue problems, you have to go under Section 8, and that's a discretionary ground. So they need to do lots of work to amend. And the thing is, if you've got other neighbours in an HMO and they're scared and they're terrified of a tenant, they're not going to do a witness statement.
You've been grassing me up, sort of thing.
Exactly, and then it makes a lot, and it's hell. It's absolute hell. And I've attended loads of these, and we do lots of
I've interviewed landlords who've been through this.
Yeah, and it's really not. I mean, I read one yesterday. No, and I might actually get the landlord to speak to you about the story. This guy's a drug addict. Is causing neighbours absolute hell. He killed a litter of rabbits. I know it's a bit grim, but I mean, I read some of this stuff, and actually, if you get rid of Section 21, where lots of landlords are using it for antisocial behaviour, you get rid of it, and you just got an antisocial. You've got to make sure the grounds for Section 8 are really.
This is the challenge for the government, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think, you know, the likes of the NRLA and other organisations and us at LandlordZONE and Hamilton Fraser, they need to listen, because it's really important. Because getting stuck with an antisocial behaviour, having the police called all the times, you know all the neighbours in that street, it becomes really refractory, and it affects people's lives.
Really badly. The police are, let's say, too busy to deal with this sort of stuff.
Well, I actually get calls from police to give them advice, actually, when they're on calls, believe it or not. Yeah, and it's an issue. They turn up there because it's about, obviously, a breach of the peace, and there's harassment, and what can a landlord do? Well, they can apply to get an injunction in the short term, but that can be expensive. We do access injunctions actually for fixed fees, which have worked quite well actually.
That's when a landlord, sorry, that's when a tenant won't allow you into the property.
Correct, yeah, and we get correct, and we get a court order. Tenants being advised to stay put by the council, very common. How will that change? I think that will have an effect. So going to court is at the moment. Let's just quickly go back, and we're coming to the end of this webinar now, and then we're going to have loads of questions. I'm sure, and Ben's going to tell us what those questions are. But where we are with courts. So let's think back at COVID times. I remember when I was doing one of these webinars every other day, stuck at home, and we were speaking quite often and writing stories and keeping landlords informed, which was really important. The court shut down from March 2020 to September 2020. You couldn't evict anyone. My opinion, quite right. We didn't have a vaccine, and what they did was they slowed up the whole court procedure. We were still issuing cases. If you had a case stuck in the court system pre-COVID, you were the worst affected.
I was going to say, because it included people who already had issued eviction notices before COVID.
But the case was in the court, but they couldn't get heard.
Yeah.
So they couldn't have a hearing date, they couldn't have an eviction date, they couldn't have any application.
Because I interviewed one lady who lives in South Africa, but is a British citizen who has a property here, and they closed down the courts the day before she was due to get the tenant out.
Yeah, I mean, we had one, and I think it's on the other slide, and I featured it on BBC London News to highlight it. We had a lady called Liliana, and she was in aesthetics, and her business closed down because she couldn't do any Botox and fillers and all that. She returned to the NHS to be a nurse. Just before the eviction date, she gets a letter from the court saying the court suspension. She got her property back a year later, and her total rent arrears, I think, were £38,000. Never got the money back. She had to sell the property. And that happens a lot as well. Sometimes as well, if you have a problem tenant, it really can affect you, not just in your pocket, but obviously your mental health as well.
So remind people watching, how many eviction processes are there each year?
So so if you look
in context,
in 2020 there was 39,000 possession claims, but no one was really issuing, and the social housing sector weren't issuing. 2021 was a little bit more, about 45,000. 2022 I predict there's going to be about 80,000 cases. 2019 there was 110,000 cases, and I think that it's going to be more than that in 2023.
4.4 million households.
Out of 4.4 million households.
You can argue
that it's, I mean, the most they've ever had is about 192,000 possession cases. Bear in mind also, you're also going to get an increase in mortgage repossessions now, because obviously that was an all-time low.
They get thrown in with all the figures, don't they?
Yeah, and they get thrown in the figures, and the courts do all the cases. So they brought in reactivation notices, review hearings, which were like they were telephone hearings. It was all a waste of time. It was just to slow up the process. So the courts are going to get busier. Normally it's 6 to 8 to 12 to 14 weeks. It really does depend what court you're up. It's a lot. The city courts are the worst because they have too much buy to let. So that in a small court, a small town, because the lists are more. And sometimes they have a shortage of judges, which doesn't happen. They've scrapped the review hearing, so you don't have to have a telephone hearing now. That was 25% of the time they'd call up, 75%. I employed one guy full time just to do telephone hearings. Waste of time. Backlog in the courts from COVID, we think, are coming back up now. Accelerated possession cases. Actually, an accelerated possession case is a hearing which is just done in closed chambers, no actually hearing date, where they go in the witness box and all that. They take about 15 minutes to look at, actually, and that's just looking at the paperwork and granting court order. And as I predict, and I've said this in the thing, I think number of possession claims will hit over 110,000 possession claims. 70% of the possession claims issued are social housing. They haven't evicted for 2 years. So that's building up.
Because I think we were saying earlier that the number of private landlords evicting tenants each year out of that figure is relatively low, isn't it? Because if you take away the social housing side of it, and you take away...
It is low. It's very low. I think the accelerated possession proceedings last year was something like 8,000 for the Section 21 case. It's nothing.
And we're not saying those 8,000 cases aren't terrible and awful.
No, of course.
We're just saying it's out of 4.4 million households.
It's still really, really low. And then basically bailiff evictions. What they had warrants that were lasting for 12 months and they were expiring and you have to reapply again. We had evictions. One eviction we had, so there was effectively 18 months worth of eviction ban. There was a 6-week window where you could do evictions where it was a tier system. We had one tenant in Grimsby where she put a note up saying, I have COVID, you can't come in.
I remember that, yeah.
And then we also had one guy that had COVID on 3 occasions in 4 months, which is quite remarkable.
Just the day before the court period.
Yeah, and he owed a £25,000 in rent arrears, and of course he didn't pay that. So there was an avalanche, and I must admit, press-wise, I was never busier because I was having to answer and do loads of interviews when the backlogs and it all started up. So, yeah, I mean, it's never nice evicting a tenant, and obviously, what does the landlord have to do? Well, we have a debt recovery department for fixed fees at Landlord Action, and that's more busy than ever. We've now got more and more staff because landlords, when you go to court and you get a possession order and you get a money order, it's not a county court judgment. Be clear about that. So you have to enforce it, and once you enforce it, then it shows up on the credit rating. So if a tenant, and the referencing is really, really imperative, right? And what you do, because you have to find out where's the tenant been. So if they've had a court order made against them, and it's been enforced, then it will show up where they've previously been. Okay,
so landlords, I can understand why landlords don't do it, because it's quite an onerous thing.
It is onerous,
but if all the landlords who don't do it are basically helping these tenants who want to dodge.
Correct, and you can enforce a money order for maybe 300, 400, 500, 600 quid, knowing I may not get my money, but at least I've got a county court judgment, because a lot of these tenants will aspire to want to own a property further down the line, but we have horrendous rent arrears cases at Landlord Action. So yeah, this just coming right to the end now, and then we can do some questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, Nigel. COVID backlogs with evictions. A lot that a bailiff now gets £21,000 a year on average. Not a lot of money to be a bailiff, to be abused, to be spat at, to be physically, have violence against you. It's not nice. So there is a shortage. There's an employment shortage across the board. Subsequently, which is an issue. So they need to get more bailiffs. I think they need bailiff reform, so they should be able to use a high court enforcement officer. That's been in our proposal. So if the rent arrears are 6 months or more, automatically there should be leave to transfer up to the High Court, and you can do a High Court eviction in the best part of 6 weeks, 4 weeks, rather than wait 4, 5, 6 months. And of course to get your property back. And look, 2021, as I said, there was only 6,204 accelerated procedure cases. That's not a lot in the grand scheme of things last year to do, and that's claims that are issued. So if you have a problem with a tenant, there's our contact details. You can go on to landlordaction.co.uk. Ben, have we got any time for questions?
Ben's put his glasses on. There must be a question.
To sign up for LandlordZONE, we would encourage any landlord out there. It doesn't cost you a penny, Nigel, does it?
It's free. Everything I do is for free. Well, not quite. But
not quite. I wish it was. We had to pay you to come here today. Right. Okay. So, and also this webinar is sponsored by Total Landlord Insurance. We cover landlord insurance. We have over 20,000 policies. We actually cover malicious damage insurance up to £25,000. So heaven forbid you've got a cannabis factory. We'd pay out on it if you had a landlord insurance.
No one would ever want a cannabis factory.
Well, no one would definitely want. So
the pictures are
so what I would do, we have got a special offer actually. So this scan here, if you scan this, people, on your mobile phone, and there's our website as well, you will get a free step 1 section 8 or section 21 notice, which will last for a year if you buy a policy with Total Landlord Insurance. We are very, very competitive, and as I said, we do the landlord insurance for the National Residential Landlord Association.
I just point out, if you've got an iPhone, that happens automatically. If you have an Android phone, you need a QR code reader app to do that.
Just as well you're a technical man, because I don't have a Scooby-Doo, right? I believe that. So we're going to do some questions now. Ben, give us some questions, please.
Well, firstly, thank you to everyone. I mean, hundreds of questions coming in this morning, so thank you for those. First up, a question for Nigel. This is Mike in London, and he says, Nigel, do you think a Labour government will be good for landlords in the future, and what will it mean?
Is that my brother? He's good, Mike.
Oh, right. Could be.
Will a Labour government be good for the private rented sector? Well, if you want to take a cynical view, you would say that the Conservative parties, or recent administrations of Conservative parties' attitude to the PRS has been pretty much aligned to the Labour parties. If you want to be rude, you'd say they've stolen their policies and copied them comprehensively. the fact that Shelter, who are a lovely organisation and have amazing,
they're great at campaigning.
But they're great, they're brilliant campaigners, and they have a good thing in mind, which is to make the tenants' experience better. But the fact that they are very much in bed with the government and also in bed with Labour, that's I'm not going to go with that. I'm just saying, but it shows you that they're both Tories and Labour are pretty much aligned on PRS. So I think a change in Labour government.
Yeah, but will that mean rent controls though? Because landlords fear rent controls, and what that means for the industry.
So what's going to be interesting is what happens in Scotland. So we've got 4 months until an election in England. No, sorry, no, longer than that. Sorry,
no, 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, being stupid. 2 years.
Yeah.
Got 2 years experiment. There's going to be a rent controls in Scotland until March 2023.
And Wales are talking about it, aren't they?
Wales are talking about it. Don't think it's going to happen. But Scotland are doing it, and they're going to do it to 2023 March or maybe beyond that. If that goes horribly wrong, then I think rent controls in England are dead in the water.
Yeah.
My gut feeling is it will go horribly wrong.
Well, they're talking about rent freezes are rent freezes.
You have to be careful with this terminology. Yeah, there's rent caps, rent freezes, rent controls. Those three things are very different.
Yeah.
Scotland is doing a rent freeze.
And the message I give to landlords is, you're tuning into webinars like this, and educate yourself. Don't panic. Do not panic. Everything's about the detail. These laws won't come in for another couple of years anyway, will they? Getting through Parliament and getting going through the process.
Well, so even if Labour did win the next election in 2 years,
yeah, but won't the rent? Didn't Simon Clarke, the housing chief, turn around and said that he wants this in with the renters reform bill in the next 2 years?
Yes, renters reform bill will happen before the next election.
Right.
Rent freezes, as we were discussing,
right,
as we have discussed, are very unlikely to happen in the next 5 years in England.
Okay. Ben, next question, please.
Thank you. Penny says, how long is it generally taking to evict a tenant in the courts now?
Right, so serving a notice, issuing court proceedings, getting the bailiffs, the 3 steps, you're looking at most probably 4 to 6 months.
And morning to Mark. Mark's in Stevenage, says, what will happen if my tenant just causes antisocial behaviour, and how do I evict them when Section 21 is abolished?
Okay, we touched on that. And well, it's a good point. So actually, that we talked about just a few seconds ago. We need stronger grounds under Section 8. It needs to be easier to be able to give evidence. It needs to be a mandatory ground. There needs to be various different provisions that are put in place. So it's easier to get a mandatory possession order for antisocial behaviour. At the moment, you have CAD numbers from police, you have witness statements, you have CCTV. It needs to be a lot more easier so landlords can understand it and don't be fearful.
Agreed.
Anna says, is high interest rates going to knock out landlords in London that cannot refinance?
Good question. Do you want to answer that first? I'll have my bit.
Is it? So that depends on whether you are going to drop down to a standard variable rate in the next 6 months. If you are, then I suspect you are going to have to retool your finances quite carefully. But I can't remember the percentages, but it's something like 40% of people are approaching going back onto a standard variable rate in the next 6 months. But there's 60% who aren't.
But on that point, and you are seeing, and I speak to a lot of big portfolio landlords. Some of those landlords are looking to offload those properties. So that creates opportunity as well. I mean, I got really lucky with my my property. I got really lucky. I locked in for 5 years at 3.15% before Liz Truss did her magical budget. So I got really lucky.
But also, I think this gentleman, as I know, is what he's referring to is the fact that house prices are higher in London, therefore the amount of money you borrowed as a landlord to buy the property is going to be huge. So therefore, any interest rate rise is going to push up. So I think what will happen is that
it will squeeze on yields.
It will squeeze on yields, and it will probably squeeze on rents, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And that's what's happening. Interest rates are going up, and I speak to a lot of landlords, and they have been putting rents up where historically they weren't.
Yeah.
Next question, Ben.
Andrew says, I am told that the rent guarantee insurance can be bought only at the start of tenancy.
Yeah.
Is this correct?
Yeah.
And does this mean that I can't benefit from the scheme in the middle of the tenancy?
Right. Okay. So there are some schemes that do it, not a lot. What you need to rent guarantee insurance makes total sense, a no-brainer. We do work for a lot of insurance companies when they go wrong. Rent guarantee insurance is you have a reference, it has to pass a criteria. Once it passes the criteria, you can purchase a rent guarantee insurance, generally about £200-300, covers up to about £2,500 a month. every single month until you get vacant possession, and covers your legal fees. Sometimes they do it mid, but most providers won't offer that.
Morning to Karen. She's a student landlord. She asks, usually she rents for 1 year only.
Yeah.
The students are looking now for houses next July 2023 as
Right.
a group HMO.
Yes.
If I can't serve notice 2 months before they leave, how will this work?
Yeah. So big problem. Do you want to go first, and I can
add? Yeah. So the whole current approach to the student housing market,
it's normally 9 months, isn't it?
Normally 9 months. So, but because of the dynamics of student renting, which is that you need to be getting students well in advance to get in, and also the students move out as soon as they've passed their degrees or they finish that year,
and go back and leave in summer, don't they?
I don't think the government understands this.
No.
So it's getting. I know that the NRLA have been banging on about this.
We have as well.
You have with ministers. Whether the revolving door doesn't help much on this. But one thing I would say is that I think that the student sector market needs special treatment.
100%. And what I would encourage you landlords out there, and you might think, oh, it's a waste of time, but it's really, really important. You do need to engage with your local MPs. You know, I'm engaged with my local MPs, Teresa Villiers, about the court delays, and she's reached out to me, and I'm hopefully going to go and meet her and stuff. Reach out to your MP, make it known to them, because it's really, really important, and it is an issue, and I do worry about this. I think that there will be some sort of concession given. At the moment, obviously after the political change, whatever, we are still in working group progress, so it's important. But it's been highlighted. We highlighted it at the Lettings Industry Council in our report, and I know everyone is. So we're trying to get that concession.
Because one aspect of the Renters Reform Act we haven't mentioned yet is the fact that we are moving from ASTs, or assured short hold tenancy, to never say that. We're moving to periodic, which is a debatable improvement, and that's going to be thrashed out. But for student landlords, like this person, that's also going to be a challenge.
Yes, definitely.
Sharon says, if we serve a Section 21 notice now to a tenant on housing benefit, at what point will the council get involved to help the tenant, and will they find alternative accommodation?
Unlikely they get involved early doors. You'd be lucky. It depends where you're based in the country. Generally, what will happen is they will say, stay put, get a court order. Once you've got a court order, get the bailiffs. Once you get the bailiffs, eviction date, come and see us. Then unfortunately the tenant will end up in a temporary accommodation. It's really, really stressful for a tenant. And then obviously there's an extra burden of cost that happens. Look, if you don't need to evict the tenant, don't evict the tenant. I mean, obviously a lot of tenants also have to pay their top-ups as well, which is going to be an issue as well. But again, that is a prime example about what's going to happen, and about an unintended consequence of landlords that will be evicting universal credit tenants.
It's a brutal way that councils manage their temporary housing accommodation.
It's a big issue. You can get guaranteed rent contracts with the council, so there's good organisations like Capital Letters. There's a good big agency in East London called Elliott Lee, where they do guaranteed rents. So they have contracts with the council. They do guarantee fixed income, 3 years, no void periods. They look after the properties and stuff like that. It depends what your market is and what your property's like as well.
Michael has rentals in England and Wales.
Yes.
And his question this morning is, are the proposals for England with reference to Section 21 broadly similar for the approaching changes in Wales?
Okay, well, I can answer that because I was in Cardiff and Swansea the last 2 weeks giving advice to lots of landlords in Swansea. So the answer is they're going to have occupational agreements as of the 1st of December in Wales. They're going to change the terminology, which I think is actually quite good, because landlord, the word landlord is outdated, isn't it?
Housing provider.
The housing provider, and the tenant is your customer. I get all that. What they're not doing is they're not abolishing the Section 21. They're having a 6-month notice period.
Instead of 2.
Instead of 2, but you can only serve it after 6 months. So, and there will be, the term of tenancies will be year/2 years. There won't be 6-month tenancy. So there still will be, I mean, you've got to realise what happened in COVID. Section 21's had they moved, and a Section 8 at one time moved to 6-month notice periods, because obviously to slow the process down.
Do you think that's a better way to do it? So keep Section 21 and move the minimum notice period.
I think that there should be a bit of a halfway house. I've said that all the way. I say that all the time. So I think there should be, and there should be some limited limitations on what you can and can't do, rather than totally abolish it. I've said that all along. Next question, Ben. Let's do 2 more questions because we're running out of time.
Okay, let's go with Suzanne, who wants to know what exactly is a periodic secure tenancy.
Hello.
Let's take that offline. I'll take that offline. I've actually got the wording. I'll tell you. Give me that. So what's that, Suzanne?
Suzanne.
Yeah, I'll do that, and I'll explain in more detail. Offline.
We haven't got time, basically.
Haven't got time. Shocking.
Andy says, which pressure groups campaign for landlords to the government? And given the problems we have, how effective do you think they've been? And what can be done to improve campaigning to highlight these problems and improve their situation?
So there are national landlord groups, and I'm sure everyone's aware of the National Residential Landlords Association, which was formed out of 2 previous national organisations. I.e., some people disagree with me, but I think NRLA are doing a good job.
They are doing a good job.
They are not alone. So there are regional landlord groups who operate in different bits of the UK. There's a big one down in Portsmouth and Southampton. There's a big one up in Nottingham. There's a big one up in other, it's Midlands got, but so they do regional campaigning. But I would agree that probably there needs to be a more focused effort on certain subjects. I know Ben Beadle at NRLA is doing his best on that front and is tireless in his lobbying. But yes, I think the message needs to get through to housing ministers louder.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talk about housing ministers that they've changed.
Well,
It's
change,
and it is an issue. You need someone that understands property, whether they've been a landlord or not, or they've been a tenant. That does help. You've also got we've got the Lettings Industry Council that I'm part of, which is a really good organisation where we have lettings leaders that will put forward information what's happening on the ground with some big numbers of lettings. You also have Property Mark, and you have various different other trade bodies as well. But I think sometimes if you look at campaigning, I think the reality is you have Generation Rent, and with Shelter, I think it is about engagement with landlords rather than them and us. But I think, isn't it something like Shelter have £40 million worth of budget to campaign? That makes a big difference.
And the challenge is that the UK private rental sector is full of 2.57 million individual landlords, and it's just very hard to herd them towards the campaigning.
But the problem is a lot of those landlords don't see themselves as landlords, and that's the issue.
And they haven't got time to do this.
And that's why the Renters Reform Bill is coming. It's a whole point of tenants having a secure property, a better property, a tenant to be able to treat the property as their home, and for landlords to be more professional up the game. I mean, you talk about Rent Smart Wells. You can never get through to Rent Smart Wells, but I do actually understand, and I agree with the philosophy that actually landlords should have some sort of education, just go on some sort of course. Look, I can tell you now, and I do a lot of property training for landlords and letting agents and councils. Is property management is not for the faint-hearted. And I think now, if you look at your journey as landlords, you need to, if you don't want to sell your properties, and you don't need to sell your properties, but you want to spend more time with the family and be on the golf course, you need to look at instructing accredited letting agents. It's really important, because Nigel, you're a landlord. Do you like taking the call from your tenant at 5 in the morning? They've lost their keys when they're
No.
Yes or no?
Well, no,
that's a no.
That's a no.
Okay, fine. You can call a friend like next time. I think that's about it. So I think we're wrapped up now. We've gone over. It was a really enjoyable webinar. Thank you, Nigel.
No worries.
Maybe we'll do this again. I wanted it debated. I wanted it chatty. And we've had almost literally just under 2,000 people that registered for this. So thank you very much. You can follow us both on social media,
Watch it again.
Shamplina, and we're going to send this recording around to the people that didn't attend on this. Hope you learned a few things. Keep on landlording. You're doing a great job. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.